The bell above the servants' door rang at 4 in the morning, though Charlotte Ellis had no need of it. She had been awake since before the sound, lying still in the narrow attic room she shared with two other maids, listening to the wind press against the shutters of Ashworth Manor. Sleep had never come easily to her, not since childhood, and certainly not now, when the world outside her window still lay wrapped in darkness and frost. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Sarah and Jane, and dressed in the gray wool of her uniform, the same uniform she had worn every day for the past 6 years. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency over the buttons, though her mind, as it often did, wandered elsewhere. To a small cottage that no longer existed, to a mother's voice that had grown fainter with each passing year, until Charlotte feared she might forget it entirely. She touched the locket at her throat, an old habit, the metal warm even in the cold room. Inside it was a miniature portrait of her mother, painted before the fever took her when Charlotte was 12. It was the only thing of value Charlotte owned, and she guarded it as though it were the last ember of a fire long since burned to ash. By the time the sun rose gray and reluctant over the hills, surrounding Ashworth Manor, Charlotte had already lit 6 fireplaces, hauled water for the kitchen, and begun scrubbing the stone floor of the entrance hall, the same floor that would within hours be trodden upon by boots and skirts belonging to people who would never once look down and see her. This was the nature of her existence, not cruel, precisely, but invisible. She was a shadow that moved through the great house, present in every room and acknowledged in none. The upper servants tolerated her. The family above stairs did not know her name. "Charlotte, mind the corners," said Mrs. Whitfield, the head housekeeper, passing through with her ring of keys jingling at her waist. There was no unkindness in her voice. Mrs. Whitfield was, in her own brisk way, the closest thing to family Charlotte had left, but even her warmth was practical, hurried, swallowed by the endless demands of running so vast a household. "Yes, Mrs. Whitfield," Charlotte murmured, and returned to her scrubbing. She did not resent her life, not truly. She had long ago made peace with the shape of it, rising before dawn, working until her hands ached, retreating each night to her small bed with nothing to show for her labor but exhaustion and the quiet satisfaction of a floor well cleaned. She had watched over the years as grand balls filled the manor with light and laughter, as ladies in silk descended the staircase she herself had polished, as gentlemen in fine coats spoke of things she could not imagine, politics, travel, love matches arranged over tea. She watched from doorways, from behind half-closed curtains, careful never to be seen watching. She had decided, somewhere in the quiet accumulation of years, that love was not meant for girls like her. Love required being seen asterisk, and Charlotte had learned that she was not the sort of person the world troubled itself to see. It was on a pale afternoon in early spring that everything began to shift, though Charlotte did not recognize it as a beginning. Lady Ashworth, mistress of the manor, had taken ill with a lingering cough, and word had come that her nephew, His Grace the Duke of Ravenswood, would be arriving to see to her care. The household had erupted into a frenzy of preparation. Rooms were aired, silver polished, menus reconsidered 3 times over. Charlotte, tasked with tending the small garden behind the east wing where Lady Ashworth liked to take her tea when well enough, worked in relative peace, away from the chaos within. She did not know, that afternoon, that she was being watched. Henry Sinclair, Duke of Ravenswood, had arrived earlier than expected, and rather than announce himself immediately to the bustling house, he had walked the grounds alone, needing a moment of quiet before facing his aunt's illness and the weight of obligations that had followed him from London. He was young for his title, having inherited it only the previous winter upon his father's death, and he carried the burden of it uneasily. The estates, the expectations, the growing pressure from his late father's friends that he marry and marry well before the year was out. He rounded the hedge near the eastern garden and stopped. A maid knelt among the flower beds, scattering crumbs for a small gathering of sparrows, humming softly to herself. An old, simple tune, nothing refined, nothing rehearsed. There was no artifice in her at all. She did not know she was observed, and so she did not perform. She simply was entirely herself, gentle and unguarded in a way Henry had not encountered in years of ballrooms filled with women who measured every smile. He watched a moment longer than propriety allowed, curious despite himself. Then, before she could turn and discover him, he withdrew quietly behind the hedge, feeling, strangely, as though he had witnessed something he had no right to see. Charlotte never knew of it. She finished her work, gathered her basket, and returned to her duties within, already forgetting the moment if she had noticed anything at all. She would have laughed had anyone suggested that a duke might have paused to watch her, might have carried the sound of her humming with him into the house. Such things did not happen to girls like her. A duke would never notice a maid. Henry Sinclair told himself he remained at Ashworth Manor only for his aunt's sake. Lady Ashworth's cough had settled into her chest with worrying persistence, and the physician spoke of rest, of patience, of weeks rather than days. It was reasonable, then, that a dutiful nephew should stay. It had nothing to do, he insisted to himself, with a maid humming among the flower beds. And yet, 3 days into his stay, he found himself lingering in the library long past any need, and it was there that Charlotte found him. Or rather, he found her, standing on her toes before the high shelves, reaching for a book that had slipped behind its neighbors. "Allow me," he said, before he could consider whether it was proper to speak to her at all. Charlotte spun, startled, her cheeks coloring. "Your Grace, forgive me, I didn't hear you come in. I was only tidying. You were reading the spines," Henry said, not unkindly. "I've done the same thing myself, searching for something I couldn't name." He reached up and retrieved the volume she'd been straining for, a worn copy of Jane Eyre and handed it to her before she could protest. She stared at it, then at him, uncertain whether she was meant to take it. "This isn't mine to hold, sir. I only dust the shelves." "Then dust it thoroughly," he said, the faintest smile touching his mouth, "and perhaps read a chapter while you're at it." "I shan't tell anyone." It was a small kindness, the sort a careless man might offer without thought and forget within the hour. But Henry did not forget it, and neither did Charlotte. In the days that followed, she found herself lingering near the library more than her duties strictly required, and more than once she found him there too, a book open on his knee, though his eyes were not always on the page. Their conversations began cautiously, a comment on a passage, a question about a character's fate, but grew, by degrees, into something neither of them had quite intended. Henry spoke, in careful fragments, of his father's death and the crushing weight of a title he had never asked for. Charlotte listened, and in listening offered something rarer than sympathy, understanding without pity. "You speak of duty as though it were a cage," she said once, dusting a shelf she had already cleaned twice. "But you might have chosen a worse one. At least yours has books in it." He laughed, a real laugh startled out of him. "You are the first person in months to make me laugh rather than bow. I couldn't bow if I tried, Your Grace. My knees are quite worn out from scrubbing floors." In turn she spoke, hesitantly at first, of her mother, of the locket she wore, of the strange, quiet loneliness of belonging nowhere. Not truly a servant in spirit, though a servant in station. Not truly forgotten, though certainly unseen. Henry listened as though her words carried the weight of scripture, and Charlotte began to feel, for the first time in years, that she was not invisible after all. It could not last unnoticed. Lady Beatrice Hargrove, a frequent guest at the manor, and a woman who had set her sights on the young duke's title with the precision of an archer, observed the change in him. The way his gaze drifted toward the library door, the way he seemed distracted at dinner, answering her carefully crafted compliments with polite but absent replies. It did not take her long to discover the cause. "A housemaid," she said to Mrs. Whitfield one afternoon, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "How touching that His Grace takes such interest in the education of the asterisk staff. Do see that the girl remembers her place, Mrs. Whitfield. I would hate for her to suffer for a kindness misunderstood." The threat was clear enough, and Mrs. Whitfield, though fond of Charlotte, could not afford to ignore a lady of Beatrice's standing. She spoke to Charlotte gently but firmly. "Mind your duties, avoid the family wing, remember what you are." Charlotte, frightened, not for herself alone but for the only security she had ever known, began to withdraw. She took longer routes to avoid the library. She kept her eyes lowered when Henry passed. And though her heart ached with something she dared not name, she told herself it was better this way. Safer. Henry noticed the absence at once, and it troubled him more than he expected. He found her several days later in the garden at dusk, sitting alone on a stone bench, her shoulders trembling with quiet tears she thought no one would witness. "Charlotte." He said her name softly, sitting beside her without invitation. "What has happened?" She shook her head, ashamed of her tears, ashamed of her feelings, ashamed of hoping for something she had no right to hope for. "Nothing, Your Grace, I am only tired." "You are not tired, you are frightened." He waited patient until she finally spoke, of Lady Beatrice's threat, of her fear of dismissal, of the impossible gulf between a duke and a maid. "I am no one," she whispered, "a servant with no name in the eyes of the world." "You would do well to forget these conversations, sir. They can lead only to my ruin." Henry took her hand, a gesture forbidden by every rule of their separate worlds, and held it as though it were something precious. "You are the most genuine soul I have ever known," he said quietly. "I have spent my whole life among people who calculate every word, every smile, every glance. You have given me nothing but honesty. I will not let the world's foolish rules decide what my heart already knows." Charlotte wept harder then, though not from sorrow. Henry said nothing more, only stayed beside her as the garden darkened, and in his silence he made a private vow. Whatever scandal might follow, he would not let station dictate the direction of his heart. The rumor spread through Ashworth Manor with the swiftness of fire through dry grass. By the time Charlotte heard it whispered among the kitchen maids, it had already reached the ears of Lady Ashworth herself, that the housemaid Charlotte Ellis had schemed her way into the Duke's private company, that she had used tears and false modesty to extract money and favor from a man too grieved and lonely to see through her deceit. Charlotte stood frozen in the corridor when Mrs. Whitfield came to find her, the housekeeper's face pale with distress. "I did nothing," Charlotte said, though her voice shook. "Mrs. Whitfield, you know me. You have known me 6 years. I know, child, I know." Mrs. Whitfield's eyes were wet. "But Lady Beatrice has spoken to Lady Ashworth directly, and in her illness her ladyship has little strength to question it. I am sorry, Charlotte. You are to leave by morning, without reference." The word struck harder than any blow. A dismissal without reference meant no other great house would take her in. No housekeeper would risk her reputation on an unproven girl accused of scheming after a duke. It meant the workhouse, or worse, the streets. Everything Charlotte had built through 6 years of aching labor collapsed in a single afternoon, built on words she had never spoken and intentions she had never held. She did not weep this time. She was too numb for tears. She packed her few belongings into a small case, a spare dress, a hairbrush, the locket she wore always at her throat, and told herself that she had been foolish to hope, foolish to believe that a duke's kindness could mean anything lasting for a girl like her. The world had simply reminded her of its true shape. She did not know that Henry had already discovered the truth. It was Thomas, the young footman who had long admired Charlotte's quiet kindness, who brought Henry the full account, how Lady Beatrice had cornered Mrs. Whitfield with threats of her own influential family, how she had fabricated the accusation from nothing but jealousy and wounded pride. Henry listened with a coldness Thomas had never seen in him before, then rose at once and went to his aunt's chamber. "Aunt," he said, kneeling by her bed, "you have been deceived. Charlotte Ellis has done nothing but show me more honesty than I have found in every drawing-room in London. It is Lady Beatrice who has lied to protect her own ambitions." Lady Ashworth, weak but sharp-eyed even in illness, studied her nephew's face. "You care for her." "I do," Henry said, without hesitation, "more than I believed myself capable of caring for anyone." It took little more than an hour to unravel Lady Beatrice's deception entirely. Confronted before the assembled household, Mrs. Whitfield, Thomas, even Lady Ashworth herself, propped upon pillows to bear witness. Beatrice's composure finally cracked under the weight of her own lies, and she was asked to quit the house before nightfall, her schemes exposed and her reputation, ironically, the one now in ruins. But Charlotte was already gone. Henry rode after her carriage in the gathering dusk, his own coat forgotten, his hair disordered by the wind, caring nothing for the dignity expected of his title. He found her at the small country station, standing alone upon the platform, her case at her feet, waiting for a train that would carry her toward a future she could not see and did not want. "Charlotte!" She turned, startled, disbelieving. "Your Grace, you should not be here." "It isn't proper. I do not care what is proper." He crossed the platform in long strides and took her hands in his, heedless of the station master's astonished stare. "The truth has been discovered. Lady Beatrice lied. You have done nothing wrong, and you will not leave this place in disgrace." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back. "It does not matter, sir. Even cleared of blame, I am still a maid and you are still a duke. Nothing has changed." "Everything has changed," Henry said, "because I have finally understood what I want, and I will not let fear of scandal take it from me." He knelt then upon the platform before the astonished eyes of strangers and porters and a station master who would tell this story for years to come. "Charlotte Ellis, I love you, not despite what you are, but because of who you are. Marry me. Let the world say what it will. True nobility was never a matter of birth, and you have more of it in your heart than any lady I have ever known." Charlotte stood trembling, the locket at her throat catching the last light of evening, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that she was worthy of being seen, worthy of being chosen, worthy of love. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, through joyful tears, "yes, Henry." The wedding, held that autumn in the chapel at Ashworth Manor, drew whispers and curious stares from society at first. A duke marrying a housemaid was scandal enough to fill a season's gossip. But Charlotte's quiet grace, her genuine warmth toward every soul she met, high station or low, won hearts that pride alone could never have moved. Lady Ashworth, recovered and radiant, gave her blessing from the front pew, with Mrs. Whitfield weeping happily beside her and Thomas grinning from the back of the chapel. Years later, Charlotte, now Duchess of Ravenswood, could still be found some mornings in the eastern garden where Henry had first watched her, scattering crumbs for sparrows, humming her old, simple tune. Only now she was never unseen. Henry would come find her there, take her hand, and remind her, as he did every day, that she had always been worthy of love. She had simply needed someone patient enough to show her.